You are now listening to the Building with AI Promises and Heartbreaks podcast, brought to you by Solid.
So, welcome everyone to Building with AI Promises and Heartbreaks. Today we have Benn Stancil on with us. Hi, Ben.
Howdy. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So, for those who don't know Ben, which I'm assuming is not many of you, most people do, but Ben is a co founder of Mode, an analytics and BI company that was bought by ThoughtSpot in 2023. While at Mode, Ben held roles leading Mode's data, product, marketing, and executive teams. At ThoughtSpot, he was the field CTO. More recently, Ben worked on the analytics team on the Harris for President campaign. He regularly writes about data and technology at ben.substack.com. And I can tell you, as a very regular reader of that Substack, it's super interesting. I love your writing style. It's creative. It's a bit emotional. It brings a lot of different facets to it. I really enjoy reading it. It's one of the ones that when I get an email, like I just did actually with your most recent blog, I will read it the same day and many times even comment. So it's a great thing. So thanks for being with us, Ben.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Happy to be here.
So Ben, we're going to talk about semantic layers. Semantic layers now have this sort of incarnation in the world of AI, but obviously semantic layers started before ChatGPT came out, many years before, and you actually had one of the more initial blog posts around this, around the need for semantic layers and so forth. Do you want to take us back a bit, maybe to your thinking back then and how you spotted it and sort of your thoughts around it?
Sure. Yeah. So semantic layers, like as a concept, are sort of way predate my time and thinking about any of this stuff or being involved in any of this. I'm sure people could squint at it and describe exactly when they said they first started. They've been around for a long time of basically some sort of structured way to define like how data is related in a database. Generally, I think people would say they kind of like really became mainstream of sorts with BI tools like in the early 90s, 2000s kind of thing. So some of the really early BI tools like MicroStrategy, which is I guess now like a Bitcoin company,
Yeah.
but back when MicroStrategy was selling software mostly, and tools like that basically were like BI tools with built-in semantic layers. And they were just ways of saying, okay, you got a bunch of tables of like customers and purchases, and here's how they're related together. And they were essentially like a formula with a table underneath it. So you can imagine like a really basic formula being, you know, revenue is, or like profit is revenue minus cost, then it would be encoding much more complicated stuff than that in it. But they were only consumable by one BI tool.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were like baked into the tool with the charts and stuff like that, but you'd only consume them in one place. And so when we were selling Mode, so Mode was like kind of a BI tool. It was often this kind of like backdoor to using your database when you didn't actually get the answer you wanted in a BI tool. So if a BI tool is this very like structured way of doing basic reporting, Mode was the thing that let you kind of off-road. It would let you write SQL queries directly against databases, and it would like answer these questions that you didn't have sort of predefined in your BI tool. But what we ended up realizing was that was kind of a frustrating setup for people because you would have, say, like a definition of revenue or a definition of what a customer is or some other complicated accounting definition that lived in your BI tool that was like canonical and defined and governed and all that kind of stuff. And then when you wanted to like answer a question about it that needed to go deeper, where you're like, oh, I want to look at revenue in this very particular way, and that's going to require me to write a custom SQL query, you couldn't use that same logic. Like you basically had to recreate all of the logic that lived in one place. And the other time you wanted to like access that information because it didn't connect. And so this was like, probably the first version of this was starting to put stuff together when I was at Mode like 2019.
Mm-hmm.
But it was basically like, hey, what if you built a thing that just sat in between the database and all of the things that queried it, whether or not it's a BI tool or something that looked like Mode or like a Jupyter notebook or whatever. And so DBT sort of started to look like this. Like DBT was a transformation layer. So they would just define like, okay, what's the relationship between tables? But if you wanted to say like, how do we roll up revenue into weekly revenue or monthly revenue, like you wouldn't create a table for each of those. And so you wanted like an on the fly formula, and they didn't have a concept for really being able to create those like on the fly formulas. And so that was like the thing. Me and one other person kind of wrote at the same time, probably in early 2021, wrote these things that were like, hey, what if we had like this independent semantic layer thing that BI tools could all query through? They called it headless BI. I called it a metrics layer. But it was the exact same concept of like, take the BI tool, split it in half, and take just like the semantic piece that had existed in it for a long time and make it independent. And so there was like some movement to build it, and now it's gone through some evolutions and stuff like that. But like that was basically the core of it, was the concept of like, what if we model data in a database, has been around for a long time, but it wasn't really this independent thing until, I don't know, 5-6 years ago. And there were some people who were like sort of a little bit like this, that had sort of flavors of this, but it became kind of much more of a, what if we just had an independent one that everything could read from, probably 5-6 years ago.
Okay. So 5-6 years ago, it kind of talk was around separating this out, pulling it out of the BI, making it its own layer. I remember reading your blog post. I read it, I think, a year and a half ago. So I read it a few years after. But you really believed in the fact that this kind of layer should exist. You made a very strong case for it. Then a couple years later, you had a post where you said, well, it didn't transpire the way that I thought it would. Share a bit about that. Walk us through that.
Yeah, so like I do think it's a good idea. I think like I stand by that as like a concept that makes sense. And I think most people would say like, sure, that like in some abstract way, putting all of your logic in one place and then having a bunch of ways you can read from it nice and neat is like, that seems nice and seems like a thing you would want. And I don't think many people like dispute that that's like if you could snap your fingers and live in that world, that'd be like a cleaner world to live in for this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
The real, I think, the reason it is very hard to actually build, and we may get there in one way or the other, but the reason it is actually pretty hard, I mean, and AI could change this some, but I think the reason it has been traditionally very hard is because if you are building a BI tool, which again, Mode kind of was, you don't necessarily want to hand that much off to like some external tool that is driving so much of what your product can do. Like if you think about what a regular BI tool does, a lot of it is like, how do I manipulate data? What are the methods by which I can do that? Like I need to create all these different crazy charts and these different ways of like transforming this table into something that looks like an expenses table, looks like a P&E thing, or looks like this crazy visualization with 4 layers of line charts with bar charts as data points and stuff like that. Like there's all this like craziness that you need to do. And a lot of that is done in how you actually manipulate the data that's sitting on top of. Like there's kind of this manipulation element to, okay, you get a table back, but you need to pivot it in all sorts of weird ways to present it in the way that exactly you want to be able to do it. And so if you are running all of that through like a third-party tool, it becomes really difficult to actually like build the product that you want to build. And so pretty quickly, I think as the BI tool, even if you want to connect to these third-party tools, you kind of realize we have to do more last mile manipulation to continue to support the features that we want to build. And at some point, then you end up with like kind of this pseudo semantic layer in the BI tool where it's like, sure, the semantic layer produces a weekly revenue table, but then the BI tool creates a rolling 30-day average, and that lives now in another place that's actually like the BI tool's visualization logic. And is that a semantic layer? So you end up kind of compounding things. And so I don't know that necessarily works all that great. I think it could, and like it's still possible, but like you end up in this place where it's a pretty important technological foundation for a BI tool to sit on top of, is how can they actually manipulate all this data. And if you're basically relying on a third-party API that's like, what features did DBT build or Cube or whoever else is building this thing, then like you really kind of tie one hand behind your back on the things that you can build.
So, okay, so the BI vendors could not rely on these semantic layers because they couldn't rely on them providing them everything they needed, and so they would need to build a semi-semantic layer on top of a semantic layer anyway. So they're saying, if we're building it anyway, why do we need to rely on an existing one? So that's right.
More or less. No, I will say one caveat to that is that certainly that could be transitional, because like, so DBT built a version of this, and there's Cube, and there's something called At Scale, I think, and a couple others that have tried to do versions of it. And there were some other startups that end up sort of pivoting to other things. They were early. And so if you are BI tool that has invested a lot in this, using what is a fairly like nascent semantic layer is pretty tough, because you've probably already built some stuff and you're trying to like sort of backport into a thing that's pretty underdone. that could certainly change, whereas those things get better. And as like, if you're a new BI tool, do you look at this and like that calculus is pretty different of not you're Looker and we have LookML. Do we want to move away from LookML? It's like, no, you spent a bunch of time building this and you built a product that's really designed around it. But if you're starting a BI tool in 2030, which like, I don't know, more power to you, I guess. But if you're doing that, like you may say, oh, there's actually some pretty good ones that are already out there. Why would I bother building a new one? I can just use this other one that does a pretty good job. So it's like, it's possible there's some just like a transitional element to that, but I don't know.
Okay. So that's the BI vendor's perspective. By the way, people still start BI tools like Omni, right? Started recently by ex-Looker people, and they're building the semantics also into Omni like they did at Looker. What is the customer perspective on this? So do customers get any value from semantic layers? At least the historic ones. We'll talk about the AI one soon.
So yeah, I mean, so this was probably another angle of it that's tough. So if they're a little bit hard to sell, like why would you go in and buy a totally independent one is a little tough. DBT, I think, had a position here that was better because a lot of companies were already using it. And so like them layering on this kind of like on the fly formula layer to the transformation stuff they already did wasn't injecting a new tool. It was just like, hey, we have this thing. Sure, it'll do more. Why not? But it doesn't make a whole lot of sense if like you've got a BI tool that you're reasonably happy with to say, oh, great. Like we're going to now split that BI tool in half and get rid of the thing that's built into it and use another one. It's like, what do you get out of that? You probably get a worse experience because it's using now like there's a slight mismatch between the third party semantic layer and the BI tool. And like, so things are probably worse. It also is like a little bit weird that as an industry, it's nice to have the mix and match thing where like you can match these BI tools with these different semantic layers or whatever. As a customer, you probably don't have that many of these things anyway. And so it's like a little bit more tolerable. Like, yeah, okay, we use LookML. It's our BI tool and our semantic. Who cares? Like we only have one of both. So why not have them be the same? That's not exactly true because people certainly do have, like in Mode's case, you know, we were selling, like I said, to people who are already using BI tools as kind of like this other, you know, deep dive backdoor in some places.
Yeah.
So I do think there is some selling point there, but the integrations have to be pretty clean and it's got to like feel pretty good. And I don't think like we've quite figured all of that out yet. There's also obviously like some cost questions to it, and stuff like that. Though I think again the bigger problem is the one that you're pointing out of like, say that you just have a pretty basic setup of you've got a database and then you've got a BI tool that's sitting on top of it. Why would you prefer a database, a semantic layer, and a BI tool on top of that, as opposed to just database and BI tool? You probably wouldn't. And so it's like it's not exactly a thing that makes a ton of sense in the basic sense.
Yep. Okay. So essentially that market struggled quite a bit. You know, as you said, they're great technologies. There's Cube, there's AtScale, there's Honeydew. There's a bunch of technologies that I've seen that are pretty good. Like they, you know, you can sit there, define the YAMLs, and they'll pull the data. They'll help you sort of pull together federated data even and make it accessible to your BI. But the challenges exist, just like you talked about. You know, why would I buy it? What, you know, does it make sense in my... So now, fast forward to 2025, people are talking about semantic layers again, but this time in a slightly different context around chat with your data and making AI be able to access data and query it and answer natural language questions, etc. You had a post recently a bit about that of, you know, will it work this time? So share your thoughts a bit about that one.
So I mean, there are two things I think that make this maybe work. There's one that I think is pretty well discussed now at this point. And I have like sort of somewhat mixed feelings about it though. But like the one is, especially in the sort of more early days of the kind of ChatGPTs type stuff, people like as soon as ChatGPT came out, everybody's like, oh my God, I can have a thing that writes SQL queries for me. And I'll be like, this is the analyst robot that I've always wanted. And people did that and it like didn't do a very good job.
Yep.
And so they realized, okay, if I query this thing through a semantic layer, which essentially is like a structured set of tasks that you can do, it's like, oh, if you want revenue, you have to basically, it's like an API into these things as opposed to just like write loose code. And so it put some parameters around what it could do. And like, it was more governed in that way. And so it was like, oh, these things work better at that than they work at writing just queries because you have a list of metrics in a semantic layer and a list of manipulations you can make of those metrics. You don't have like, I have to write free form text to figure out how to build all this stuff and join it all together. And so like, it was just a structured way of doing things that certainly helped. And so in that way, like there was somewhat of a, hey, we should build more of these semantic layer type things because they make it easier for you to have like AI stuff on top. So if you think of like BI tools as just one way to interact with data, you could also imagine a chatbot being another way to do it, that like writes queries for you. And so that's a nice governance piece underneath that than like asking a chatbot to be like, can you like sling 100 blind query together and hope you get it all right? And if you don't, I'll never know.
Yeah.
There's another side of it too, potentially, which is like, and this one I have mixed feelings on. It's possible that if you get good enough at the chatty stuff, you stop needing to do a lot of the custom BI stuff. So there's an interesting angle, a little bit of this of like, this is another sort of rough thought, is a lot of like the complexity that we build in software is sort of like a middle desire of what we want. In a lot of cases, if we had like the Airbnb had this famous question, like, what's the 10-star experience? Basically, like imagine the absolute best thing you could do and then like work backwards from there. A lot of software, if you like imagine the absolute best thing you could do, like the 10-star experience, it's basically an EA. It's basically like, the best email client is not an email client. The best email client is someone who comes into my room and says like, you have some emails. Here's the ones you need to read. You need to tell me what to respond. Like I just tell somebody what to do and they go do it. And like the best project management software is not Jira or Linear. It is like a really good PM with a spreadsheet that just tells you what you should be working on. And so like, if you get really good at that, you stop needing a lot of complex UI and you actually just need more like chatty stuff. And so it's possible that happens with BI, where like the best version of BI is not show me dashboards. It's like, tell me the things I need to know about what's going on and like make one chart of it. I don't need 50 charts to consume a bunch of information. I just need you to like tell me what's important. So if that's true, then like, okay, the semantic layer thing becomes a little bit more of a lot of the business logic lives there. And the BI tool is just like a chatbot that sort of knows how to interact with it. And so I could see there being, in that case, if you think of like how that splits BI, rather than being like, okay, there's just like semantic layer logic and then all of the complex interaction, charting, visualizations, dashboard stuff that you typically get in BI, it becomes much thinner on top, where it's just like an agentic loop, like a prompt loop type of thing that like figures out when this person asks this question, how do I go figure out what they mean when they say revenue and that sort of stuff. But the actual like manipulation of the data becomes a lot simpler. And so that all then can kind of be managed through like semantic layers. So it's like the data part of the BI manipulation becomes like thicker and becomes kind of semantic layery. And then like the interactive, what do I talk to part is thinner in terms of like the actual UI, but it's much more complicated and like it needs logic to go reason when I say like what went wrong yesterday. It like kind of can be like, what does that mean? Like it does what an analyst would do, which is like, how do I figure out what went wrong? What are they talking about? Oh, I'll go read some Slack messages. Oh, it's this. Okay. It's like that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Like why?
Exactly.
You do seem skeptical about that though. So explain the skepticism.
I don't know. I think that could happen. I don't, it's slower than I think. It's like stuff doesn't go away that quickly. People like their charts. And so I don't know that that's going to happen that quickly. It's people, these things are not close to it yet. Like it's a long way away from being able to like kind of answer questions well, it seems. A lot of people have tried and just haven't had any luck. So I'm skeptical that it's the sort of thing that's like, the analogy I always use is like self-driving cars. It's easy to build. I mean, easy, like, I have no idea. I can barely.
If you have the $10 billion,
it's like easy to build a self-driving car that like does pretty well in a parking lot or on a highway. But like you put it by a school and you're like, oh God, like this could go horribly wrong. And so it's like fairly easy to build the BI things that can handle simpler questions, toy questions, the stuff that sort of like gives the appearance of this thing is close to really working, but it's really hard to make it actually work. And this is another thing I've sort of talked about some, is like, there is a real problem that data has here, which is it's really hard to know if it worked. Like if you vibe code an app, you can just click all the buttons. If you click the buttons enough, you'll be like, yeah, it works. What does it do? I don't care. Like I clicked the button and the thing appeared. If you like say, give me a chart and it gives you a chart, how do you know if it's right? Like you have no way to know if that's correct other than like read it line by line. Like it's like, give me an Excel sheet with a bunch of numbers in it. Is this Excel sheet right? Like the only way I can validate that is like this really tedious thing of actually like reading it. And so how do you solve like the vibe coding analytics part with that? I don't know, because you just have to trust it a lot, which is like you trust analysts in the same way. There has to be some kind of like, just like, yep, this person did it and I guess I'll trust it. But I don't, for whatever reason, I think like we will have somewhat of a different like psychological reaction to a robot creating a thing than a person creating a thing.
Yeah,
Or we seem to.
I think the bar is a lot higher for robots or AI than humans. We have this implicit trust of an analyst or human saying, okay, this person's been here for 2 years. I trust what they're building and giving to me. AI, I think people's bars higher. Same thing, you make the parallel to self-driving cars. Waymo in San Francisco is safer than human drivers. Still, I take people on Waymo rides all the time, and initially they're very scared. Initially, they're
Mhm.
saying, "Oh, what are we going to do? What if this thing makes mistakes?" Say, well, it could make mistakes, but actually, it's going to make less mistakes than a human, or at least less disastrous ones. I think humans have a higher bar, so that's obviously a challenge there.
Yeah, and I've wondered about that. Like, I don't really like the Waymo example is a good one to me because like I don't know. Like, there is something you can look at the numbers, but like it's way safer, and you're kind of like,
Wait,
oh,
yeah,
but is it like? And the best I can figure on that is it's it's the tungsten cube problem. So like Anthropic set up this, they had this like paper they wrote where they had created this store, and they're like, the
yeah,
store is gonna be run by Claude.
yeah,
It like didn't do a terrible job of running the store, actually. Like the store lost a little bit of money or whatever. It
yeah,
probably did about as well as like a human, some like random engineer would do showing up and running the store. But it also did some really weird, like it did this whole thing where like it got convinced to buy a bunch of tungsten cubes. And you're like,
yeah,
a
yeah,
human would never do that. And
yeah.
I think it's those problems that are, there's something about like, it makes mistakes that I don't understand and are just like
Hmm.
so out of left field that it's not like the percentage, like the error rate that matters. It's like, I need to know it's not going to buy a tungsten cube. And I don't know why I need, like, it probably won't, but like, I don't know. The Waymo is like, the Waymo could go crazy and drive off a cliff. Like, it could just it could short circuit. A human doesn't really do that. Like, they might maliciously, but you're not going to be like driving down the highway and suddenly like, oh my God, I freak out. Let me just like veer into a bunch of stuff. It's like, that just doesn't happen. And so it's like that short circuiting thing. I think that's as best I can figure is like why there's anxiety there is you're like, do I know that something is in control that has no sense of like self-preservation or logic or reason, or like it can just like get itself off the rail. Computers can crash.
Yeah. It can make weird things. Like that, by the way, the tungsten example. So what happened was the engineers at Anthropic convinced that Claude running the grocery store thing, they convinced it that it would be really good for it to sell tungsten cubes, and they also convinced it to sell it at a very low price. So between the two of them, it saw a lot of demand and it saw a need, and so it ordered a ton of them and sold them at a massive loss. And they thought it would be really hilarious. So they got the they tricked the AI, but it makes mistakes. Like on Sunday, I don't own a Tesla, but one of my friends does, and he has FSD. And we were driving towards Sacramento from where we live, and the Tesla made a really weird mistake on the highway. Something that caused me to think, oh, whoa, this thing, I don't know if I can trust this
Yeah.
thing because it felt very weird as a mistake. It wasn't dangerous, but it just caused you to think, can I trust this thing?
Yeah.
Now, obviously, again, you look at statistics on a per mile basis, Tesla FSD is safer than many drivers out there. But my instinct was to tell my friend, how about we turn off this FSD thing and you drive? Which is funny. I'm trusting my friend more than
Yeah.
I'm trusting this algorithm with my life. Although, if you think about it statistically, it's probably that the algorithm is safer, but we have that sort of inclination as humans.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't, I mean, that's that sort of thing. I don't like I suspect that happens. And I don't, if I've never been in a Waymo or Tesla that did anything weird. I don't know if I've ever been in a Waymo or Tesla that's done self-driving stuff outside of like parking lots, but it would probably be like, take me some time to get over the like, oh, this thing
Yeah.
did a really like, I'm not sure how
Yeah.
much longer, yeah, we'll just wait for this to get better kind of thing. Like
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah. It's exactly that. You're like, why did it do this?
yeah.
Yeah, I can understand that. So if you go to the BI side of things, you're like,
Mhm.
okay, this thing will get better, but very basic capabilities at first, and over time will get better. So when you think about it, maybe from the perspective of the BI vendors, Tableau or Power BI under Microsoft, or generally BI vendors, what do you think their world's going to look like in a few years as this progresses?
Um, I mean, so my guess is that for a bit, nothing changes, that all of the like, you make charts and do BI stuff, and the lookers and Power BIs and Tableaus are kind of the same. That stuff is pretty entrenched, and like, it's hard to get rid of, and it doesn't go away overnight. So I don't imagine that changes all that much. And they will, I am sure, tack on, and they already have in various degrees, tack on chatbot type of things. Like, again, if you think of we talked about this a lot at Mode and then at ThoughtSpot, and like, everybody is an idea everybody has of like, oh, the way you create a chart in Tableau is you drag a bunch of pills in little boxes, and it's like, it's no code, but it's like configuring a thing in a way that's like, the UI is not that intuitive. If you're like, I want to create a line chart with this, with the rolling 90-day thing, it's like, it's hard to know how to do that. And so they have built a lot of like, basically chatbots that are essentially trying to configure the chart for you. They don't run queries, but they like to put the pills in the right places and set the right configurations of that. And that's also pretty governed, because it's like, it's doing a thing that you can then just look at the configuration and be like, was that right? Okay, it's right.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be a lot of that.
Easier to trust.
Where they're just like layering a kind of like chat interface on top of the existing thing. My like somewhat more, I would say, like, controversial, I don't know if it's controversial or not, but like somewhat more like, maybe things look pretty different kind of view on this is the way in which a lot of AI stuff changes BI is not by like someone comes along and reinvents BI with AI. There's got like a million of those probably at this point.
Yes.
It's more that we like stop using data all that much. Like the example I've used with this before is if you run like a restaurant and you want, like, say you're running a bar or a restaurant and it's like not going great. The thing that like you could do is you could put a bunch of like instrumentation in your bar and restaurant and track foot traffic and track like the orders that people are making and trying to correlate like what time of day do people order different things and all this stuff. And like, okay, you could try to do this really quantitative approach to understanding the business, or you could just talk to a bunch of people. And like, chances are talking to a bunch of people is better. Like, you're probably going to learn a lot more from that, but it's hard. It's expensive. It takes a lot of time. You end up talking to like a random sample of people because you can only talk to so many people at once. You will talk to 10 people and like conclude a bunch of stuff, but like, it's like useful, but not that useful. And so like the data thing is really, it isn't because data is necessarily like the truth. It's because it's scaled. It's because you can like look at every order, not the 10 people you had time to talk to. And so, but AI, in a sense, is like, gives you the ability to talk to everybody. Like, it lets you say, hey, we could collect just like 30 seconds of feedback from every customer who walks in here. We stick a camera in front of their face and we say, take $2 off your meal and just tell us what you think in 30 seconds. Okay, we do that. You don't do that now because you can't do anything with that video. But if you can, you might start doing that. And then you might, instead of like asking a bunch of questions of a BI tool to be like, how are people using my restaurant and what do charts look like? You would just say like, I have this giant library of people giving me feedback on the restaurant. Let me ask them. And AI can aggregate that. Like, it can basically be an aggregate of this unstructured thing. And so it seems to me that there could be a lot of ways where that sort of thing starts to happen, where it's not, oh, I have a chatbot that can answer data questions. Because again, you have to go through all these layers. It's pretty hard. How good is it? I don't like, there's a bunch of tech you have to build. And at the end of the day, what you get is a chart that you then still have to interpret. And that part's hard too. If you could just say like,
even understanding it,
here's a bunch of customers. What do they like? Like, that's a thing you give to a CEO and they're like, I probably going to use that one instead of this other one because it's way faster. And how much better is it? I don't know, but like, it feels pretty good. And so like that is basically associated demand with the same thing. And so I think that like BI feels it in that way where, oh, we just don't use charts for as much because we can ask things in these other ways. It's as if you had like a really, if you had a user research team that could talk to tons and tons of people at once and put together reports really, really fast, you would rely on your data team less. And so I think it's that sort of split that is like where BI has more foundational changes. Is it's not so much we redo BI. It's like AI did not replace Google by making search better. AI was just a different thing that kind of solved the problem of how do I find facts on the internet. And I don't think anybody would have really thought a chatbot like a chat room chatbot would replace Google, but it like kind of did, because it's like, oh, the chat room chatbot, in order to be able to sound human, has to know everything ever existed.
Yeah.
That's kind of the same thing. It's like, it's this sort of indirect way of getting there, but I think it ultimately replaces kind of the same thing. And that's more of how this stuff changes.
Yeah. So you're basically, you're sort of you're taking another step further. You're saying, okay, why do we even use data? What are we trying to achieve? Well, we're trying to answer questions like, why is the business not going very well? Well, if you go to that level of problem, there are actually other ways to solve it that are not by using data. They could be using other things. Just like, with the Google search example you just said, people are looking for answers to questions. Google search is a way to do that, but it's not the only way to do that. We found a different way to answer people's questions. So that's an interesting way to look at it. So essentially, have you seen good examples of that working already? Of like being able to collect a lot of information or to be able to make better business decisions without needing to leverage structured data that you tracked in some warehouse?
Not really. And I'm surprised that that hasn't happened more. Though I don't know that I would know of it. And well, like that's not. It's hard to say. It has happened in ways that are somewhat indirect. So like the Notion, Granola, Slack, all this like record meeting notes type of thing is that same concept. It's not so much like track customers, but it's figure out what's going on in your company. And to some extent, and there's like the Gong version of that that's doing the same thing with customer calls. That actually is probably some of that too. So there is a lot of that. I don't know of many people who've tried to build like a database of those things such that they are querying them more, like treating that stuff as though it is basically a database of unstructured data that they write these sort of like natural language queries against. I have heard of people like Snowflake and Databricks have like tried to do some flavor of that, and it's kind of
Mhm.
early, I guess.
Yeah.
But the closest thing I think is, well, the closest thing is two things. The closest thing is there are definitely versions of this with this like Gong meeting notes thing.
Mhm.
And to some extent with like Slack or, tell me what's going on. All that stuff is basically this idea. The other version of it is I've started to see some of it in product analytics products. So they have things like session replay, which are recording clicks and stuff.
Mhm.
Um, they have tried to add a little bit more of like ask questions of session replay, where it's not give me like a heat map of what people are seeing, or give me like one of these like Sankey diagrams if they go to page A and then page B and then page C. That's like this quantitative expression of it. It's a little bit more of like, tell me where people are having problems. And so I don't know how that works. It probably doesn't work super great, but it's like attempting to basically say, can we interrogate this like less structured thing that is like a sequence of events, or in some cases like a video capture, and have it like answer questions about that directly. So it's like it's again still pretty early, but there's been bits and pieces of it. Whether or not it works, I don't know. To the point of what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, my track record on this stuff is not great. So maybe it's all terrible.
I shouldn't bet on the things that
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
excited about, is what you're saying, kind of thing.
yeah. They
Do
sound
you
great, but are they?
Do you use AI for any of your stuff? Like whether it's on the blog or you've got your ventures and you've got like all kinds of different things that you're involved in.
Mhm.
Do you use AI to make better decisions anywhere there?
I use it a lot, but I probably use it for three things mostly. One is I use it as a thesaurus.
Yeah, for blogs
It's
it's useful.
Yeah, and it's like
Yeah.
it's pretty useful for either just like I'm trying to find like a word, like you can basically give it more expression.
Yeah.
Or you can be like, I have a phrase. I need like it doesn't just like word to word match. And be like, I have a
Yeah.
thing. Like, how do I, whatever.
Yeah.
So there's a version of that. I use it a lot as like a kind of augmented search. And actually I found that honestly, like Google AI mode is considerably better than ChatGPT on this typically. But it'll be like, I remember a movie scene like this where this stuff happened. And like, you could search for it. And actually like searching in Google pre-AI stuff wasn't terrible for this stuff,
Yeah.
but it like works a good bit better that way. And so like,
Yeah.
there's a version of that I think it's like, it's not, I don't use it to replace search as much, but I use it to replace this kind of like, I don't really know what to search for, but I can kind of give you some thoughts and just like go off and find it.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
that
then
works for me too.
Yeah, I have like a sort of hobby side project sort of thing I'm doing with a couple of friends and another company, like a consulting thing that is building. It's building like a benchmark, like an AI benchmark, and so I use it. Obviously, like the thing itself is very AI oriented, but it's also stuff like ChatGPT or Cursor are pretty good for like code stuff, and it's in a way of like you tell it what to do, you sort of look at it, you kind of scan it, like, it looks good, sure, whatever. And then you try and test it, you realize it doesn't work and you have to go through and fix stuff. But yeah, it certainly, I think, is helpful. I am not an engineer. I can like get away with some of it, but I'm not an engineer. And it's certainly very helpful for that.
So that the third one is kind of vibe coding, basically,
Basically.
or maybe more advanced a bit than vibe coding. Like,
Yeah, I would say it's like it's probably vibe coding if you were an engineer. No, again, I'm not, and so like I can read it enough to know what it's doing. But things like Lovable, I find very frustrating, to be honest, because it's too black boxy, and I don't know how to escape it once it gets broke. Once like something gets out of place, you're like, I don't know what to tell you anymore. You just kind of keep being like, no, it doesn't work. No, it doesn't work. And it gets very frustrating. When you can see the thing, be it in Claude Code or Cursor, you do have like okay, I can go look at it. I can read it. I can be like, this stuff looks wrong. You can kind of edit it. And I don't know. When I am like capable enough to be able to typically figure out what the thing is doing, but I'm not going to like, I'm not making like a production thing in the traditional sense. So I don't need to go through it line by line and be like, is this exactly like, hardened, secure enterprise code? It's like, nah, it works. A lot of happy path.
yeah, I agree with not being production. So I use Cursor and I've used Claude Code, just like you mentioned. The Claude Code experience was actually much better than I anticipated because it's like so text terminal kind of thing. But I agree with you. It's not production. Like I can read the code, I can understand what it's doing. Sometimes it will run into issues and I can understand why it's running into the issue. And then I can explain back to Claude, hey, I think this is what's going on here. And then it's like, oh yes, you're right. And then it tries to fix it. But you need to be an engineer to do that. So it's mostly saving you time on writing the code, looking up documentation, things like that. It's not doing things that you could not have done maybe
Yeah.
yourself.
It does. I have one thing that is sort of wild about it is like it is extremely sycophantic. And so anytime you say something like, hey, maybe this is like, this looks weird, whatever, like, should you do it this way? It's always like, oh my God.
You're right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, of course. And
Yeah.
it's like, there's part of me where it's like, I don't know what I'm doing, man. Like,
you probably know better than I do. Don't agree with me.
Like I was asking you if that's a good idea. I was not saying go do it, but as soon as you say like, oh yeah, I'll get right to work on implementing that. I'm like, no, that's not. So I am sure that there is some sort of weird effect of all of this where like, I have done this thing. And every time I tell it to do something, it tells me it's a great idea. And I'm like, oh yeah, I know what I'm doing. And I've mostly just like sort of compounded this thing into a whole bunch of terrible ideas. It's gotten worse and worse. So I don't know how to solve that problem, but yeah, it thinks I'm very smart.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes you feel really good about yourself, doesn't it?
Yeah. And like, even that's the thing. Even when it does that, it does it every time.
Yeah.
There are times when you're like, oh, this looks too complicated or whatever. Like, I think this is redundant. I think you need to like combine these things. It does sort of feel good to be like, yeah, you're right. I'm like, yeah. Okay. Like, even though
There's something weird about interaction with AI. Like, for example, sometimes I'll see LinkedIn posts that are very clearly written with AI and I will still read them because I'm like, actually, this is interesting. And even though it's like exactly the structure of AI, now in most cases, my AI filter triggers, I see enough, env dashes and stuff like that. And so my brain filters them out. But every once in a while, you see something like, oh, this is interesting. Yeah, I can tell it's AI, but it is interesting. So sometimes like the interaction with AI, even though it's very obvious in the fact that, it's just trying to get you to like it or like it, the production of the content is exactly AI, still, sometimes we like it. We like what comes out. I don't know how to explain that.
Yeah, I have no idea if it's like, as a somewhat dystopian thing, there is part of me that thinks we get to a point where we stop caring, partly because we then filter the things ourselves. Like, the thing to me about that is weird of like, here's a post on LinkedIn that is AI written or whatever, is we're still in a phase where it's attempting to not be. Like, yes, they did not want to write it, but they wanted you to think that they did. And like, that's a little bit weird where if they wrote it in Japanese and you got a translation, you would be seeing that through like this, I mean, now it's AI, but you're seeing that through like an AI intermediary.
Yeah.
And you don't really think of that as being weird. Like, yeah, okay, I can't read what they wrote. That's fine. Like, fine, give me a version of it that's summarized. But it's something about like the fact that it's the impersonation, I think, that feels weird. And so I'm like a little bit of the opinion that the thing that changes is we stop trying to pretend to impersonate it, and we instead just like apply filters to it. So like we just never actually see what the other person says. Like we all just speak our own language and we all just read our own language essentially, which is like kind of weird and dystopian, but it feels like that is more likely to be like, oh, I know it's all written by AI. I might as well just, who cares? I don't need to read the specific words because they didn't write them. And so like, then there's just like this weird intermediary between everybody, which again, I'm like, I don't love that exactly, but it's like, maybe.
It feels like it's going to go that way. Like, I was in New York a few weeks ago, and the subway now has ads. I think it was for shoes that look very clearly AI generated, and I think they even did it a bit on purpose for it to look that way. And you look at it, and you're like, I'm not bothered by the fact that this is AI generated. I mean, what's the difference if a model puts the shoes on and they photograph the model versus the model is generated by AI, this image, and has the same shoes on? Like, why do I even care? Why does it even matter? Other than the fact that the model just lost their job to the AI. But as a consumer, why do I care? Why does it matter?
Yeah. I mean, I like this happened a couple days ago. I don't know when, I guess a couple days ago. There's the Charlie Kirk thing. Like Trump gave some, White House Oval Office bit of, they posted on Twitter or whatever, that was like him having some comments. There were like some kind of weird, everybody now like watches these videos with some kind of like, what's going on with, what's that weird hand movement? How many fingers does he have? And there was like a couple like little weird things like that then people were like, why is he posting an AI thing? Which, one, on one hand, you're like, I have no idea if it is or isn't, but like, I assume it's not, but like, maybe. But one question is like, it's weird if he did, but why? Like, why does it matter? Like, it's posted. He says this is his thing. He says this is what I believe. It's not like a fake thing where somebody's trying to pretend to be him. It's like, no, sure, I agree with all that. That's what I would say. The fact that you didn't record me saying it, it's like, I don't know. I'm not seeing you in person. I'm seeing like a video that's been through 100 layers of intermediation, getting this video from the room to me. Okay, this is kind of just a squint at it, a really different layer of intermediation. It's like, I don't know. It feels like we start to become more comfortable with like, yeah, okay, whatever. You said it because you said you agree with it, not because you actually said it.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I agree with you. At some point, it might not matter anymore. Okay, we are coming up towards the end of our episode. I have a few questions for you, so I'll ask you and try to think just as fast as you can. Just blurt out whatever comes. Okay. AI tool you can't live without.
I mean, ChatGPT is the easiest one just because it's like a nice utility. The one that's like an actual tool that I use the most is probably Cursor.
Okay. AI myth you'd bust in one sentence.
No, I don't think like I don't think it's a bubble, for better or for worse. Like I think a lot of like the startups will die, but I think like the foundational parts of it actually are probably still small relative to how big they'll get.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with you very much. One prediction for AI in the next 5 years. I know that's a crazy question, but try to take like your.
I mean, I think like a bunch of this sort of weird stuff will become normal. I think this idea of like the thing isn't real will be like, again, a real video. The concept of what that even means will stop becoming something we quite have a firm grasp on. The idea of like, I said something like that. What does it mean to say something will start to become a thing we don't have a firm grasp on. I think there's be like a lot of really weird. I think it starts to become like weird metaversey stuff. Not like we all live with avatars walking around a thing like in the Matrix, but more of like this kind of odd metaverse of sorts. Where like we watch videos that thing didn't happen in the real world, but it sort of did it happen? Like who's to say? Like it's like a kind of alternate dimension of sorts that's like we just kind of come to exist in this weird intermediate space that's like stuff is kind of not real, but we're okay with that.
Yeah, it's like the new Netflix movie, the K-pop one. Great music. Like the soundtrack is playing throughout my house again and again and again and again. The kids have been playing it. The fact that humans sang it, great. It could have been AI just the same. Nobody cares. At least the kids don't. But to them, it's soundtrack that they like and cartoons or not cartoon exactly, but sort of a cartoonish movie, and it's fine and it's okay.
Yeah. So it's like that's if you start listing all your movies or like that or all your song, like is that the metaverse?
Is that a problem?
Kind of. Yeah. Like I don't know, but it starts to get the definition of real starts to get fuzzy.
Yeah, exactly. And does it matter actually? Does it actually matter? Fantastic. Okay. This conversation was really interesting. Like we started from something very grounded, semantic layers and
Yeah.
all that. And now we're talking about, whether this is all real. Maybe we're in a sim, but I had a feeling the conversation would go in that way, which is why I wanted you here. I knew this is kind of going to go to the more philosophical side of things. So, first of all, Ben, thank you very, very much for being here. And as I
Yeah.
mentioned in the beginning, if you are not reading Ben's Substack yet, so it's benn.substack.com. That's the main URL, right? Got that right? B-E-N,
Mhm.
yeah. BENN, so 2Ns.substack.com. Really recommend you guys go read, subscribe. And also, of course, if you are not subscribed yet to our podcast, so whatever platform you're on, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next episode. Ben, thank you very, very much. Have a good rest of your day.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Appreciate you having me and talk to you soon.
Thanks. Thanks, Ben.